I'm Terry Cooke, and welcome to Hamilton's Vital Signs. As always, we're talking about things that are current and relevant to our community. We're in Black History Month, and this past weekend I was fortunate enough to attend the John C. Holland Awards dinners in Hamilton that celebrate the achievements and contributions of Hamiltonians of African descent, and I particularly love the focus on youth and achievement. And we have two guests today who I think are uniquely informed to talk about the Black history and experience in this community. So Adrienne Shadd, welcome. You are the author of one of my most recent and favorite books, The Journey from Tollgate to Parkway, African Canadians in Hamilton. You can pick that up at King West Books. My friend Dave Kurak sells it, and I highly recommend it. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And Evelyn Auchinvole, resident historian at Stewart Memorial Church and longtime leader and bridge builder in our community. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
I always like to start with a bit of biographical stuff so our audience can understand how our guests came to do the work that they're doing and find the passion that they have. And I'm going to start with you, Adrienne. Mm-hmm. How'd you come to write books on the history of African Canadians in Hamilton?
Well, it was kind of by accident, I think. I'm from North Buxton. Mm-hmm. North Buxton has a museum on the history of the community, which was one of the last stops on the Underground Railroad. Mm-hmm. So I was doing nothing one summer day and happened to wander into the museum. And the curator at the time, a wonderful woman named Arlie Robbins, just kind of nonchalantly handed me an article on Adrienne Shadd. And it said newspaper editor, teacher, lawyer, suffragette, and I had never heard of this woman before. And this article was fascinating. It talked about her and her family, her brothers and sisters, her extended family, their achievements. I didn't know anything about it, and I just said, wow, if my family has these achievements in its background, what other families, can we talk about, can we learn about, who have done exciting things in history? And I think that was really the start of my journey on the path of learning about Black history.
And also testament to the power of a mentor, educator in getting us inspired to learn about who we are and where we came from.
Absolutely,
right?
yes.
Same question, Evelyn. How'd you come to be involved in both Black history at Stewart Memorial and in the life of this community?
Well, I was living it, and in living it, I had to respond to the experiences I was having, mm-hmm. and it carried forward. I was born to this. Mm-hmm. My uncle always thought I should be a lawyer, and this was an opportunity to use those gifts that I was given to not only learn more about my community, but also to learn more about myself, mm-hmm. and to establish my place in Hamilton and my children's place in Hamilton. So I think I was born into it.
And family were a couple of generations at Stewart Memorial.
Yes.
My deep roots.
Very deep roots.
Yeah.
Yes, very
Amazing.
Deep roots. The Wise family, who were plasterers, mm-hmm. and carpenters in the city of Hamilton, going back to the early 1920s. They were plastering ceilings all over Hamilton. Yes, my roots go a little back. My grandparents coming to Canada in the early 1900s.
Yeah.
Yes.
Amazing.
Mm-hmm.
I want to talk about your book because I was a history major as an undergraduate. Mm-hmm. My dad's a history teacher, or was, retired now. And first of all, I love the writing. But what struck me as somebody that's been fascinated for a lifetime about about Hamilton's history was the extent to which I was ignorant of the history, especially of slavery in this community. So Richard Beasley, who was probably our most famous founder, much of the family compact, a guy named Crooks, that Crooks Hollow is named after, who was an MP. George Hamilton, the namesake of the community, his dad, Robert Hamilton, was a slaveholder. I knew none of those things before I read your book. And I want you to talk a little bit to us about the history of the journey from Tollgate to Parkway and kind of the underlying themes that you have captured so well in your book, Adrienne.
Well, as you mentioned, a lot of people believe that it started with the Underground Railroad and escaped slaves coming to freedom to Canada and then settling in Hamilton, but there is an earlier history of slavery that a lot of people have no idea about.
Yeah.
And so I was really interested in delving as much as possible into that history. And so it starts out with slavery in Hamilton, in the Hamilton area, and moves up through the decades and the years and centuries, actually. One of the themes that I was really interested in capturing was to talk about the diversity of the people who came here in terms of their background. Some were escaped slaves who ran, to freedom on the Underground Railroad. Others were free blacks who were coming here. Some were free because they had been living in freedom. They had escaped earlier and were living in freedom in the United States. And when the fugitive slave law came down in 1851, they felt they were in peril of being re-enslaved. So a lot of them moved to Canada and this area at that time. And there were also freeborn blacks. There was a small group that were educated, professional types. And all of these people were coming in. I think the impression is that, we all know about the Underground Railroad and the slaves who escaped, and and with nothing but the clothes on their back, really, and came to Canada. But it was actually a more complicated and diverse group that were actually here and settled here.
Yeah, and you capture in one section in your book the myths and the mythology about who we think the black population of that era was, and they were not stereotypical. They were nuanced and many diverse parts of their background. Evelyn, I want to ask you specifically about where Stewart Memorial fits in this picture, because obviously it is our oldest and most celebrated black church, but it is very much intertwined with the social and economic history of this community.
Yes, very much so.
In the second half of the show, we're going to talk about that fascinating map that you've brought, but tell us about the roots of the church and its contribution to the journeys of African Canadians in Hamilton.
Well, Stewart Memorial Church was established first as St. Paul's African American Episcopal Church. And one of its first ministers was the Uncle Tom, Uncle Tom's Cabin figure, Josiah Henson, who was like a circuit minister once he came across from the United States into Canada, and from St. Paul's African Methodist Episcopal Church rose up Stewart Memorial Church, which continues to this day. So we're talking about a history that begins in the early 1800s, 1830, and comes forward to the present day.
And Stewart Memorial, in addition to obviously serving a faith community, also has a history of political activism and advocacy in confronting barriers and racial stereotypes and all that kind of stuff in this community. And talk a bit about that.
Well, not so much the church itself, but personalities within the church have. The Mount Olive Lodge, which is a black fraternity of the Masonic Order, were involved with bringing black people, African Americans, into this area. They were like conductors along the Underground Railroad to assist that passage, and they have actually had a plaque on the church to show that they were in fact connected to Stewart Memorial Church. So the activism, I would say, started within that organization, and since those members were also members of St. Paul's, it then has a legacy within it of individuals, not necessarily organized groups, who were prepared to speak up and advocate. Reverend John Christie Holland certainly was one of those shining personalities that advocated for employment and fair treatment for blacks, to get them jobs at the fire department. So he was in fact a role model for advocating for the black community, for individuals.
And I got to ask, did you know Reverend Holland?
No.
Okay.
No.
He passed, because he passed relatively...
In the 50s, which would be, just as I was beginning to attend at Stewart Memorial Church.
Wow.
Yes.
Great history. Unfortunately, we have to go to break, believe it or not. We've consumed the first half of the show. But Adrienne Shadd, author and contributor to our understanding of history, and Evelyn Auchinvole, we're talking about Black history in Hamilton in Black History Month. I'm Terry Cooke. You're watching Hamilton's Vital Signs, and we will be right back after this commercial break. Here we go. And we're back. I'm Terry Cooke. You're watching Hamilton's Vital Signs, and we are with Adrienne Shadd, who is the author of The Journey from Tollgate to Parkway, African Canadians in Hamilton, which we've been talking about, and Evelyn Auchinvole, resident historian at Stewart Memorial Church. In Black History Month, we celebrate the achievements of Hamiltonians and Canadians of African descent, but your book in particular also chronicles barriers that they face and overcome in the course of hundreds of years of history. Can you talk a little bit about that and what we need to understand about the challenges of the early black citizens of this community?
Oh, yes. Well, there were always challenges, but I think toward the latter part of the 19th century and through the 20th century into maybe the 60s and 70s, blacks came to be pushed down to the bottom of rungs of society because they could not get the better jobs. They were kind of stuck in menial positions. And one of the people I like to talk about is Ray Lewis, the famous sprinter, who has two autobiographies. And he talks about how blacks, when he was coming up, all they could get was a job as a railroad porter. So imagine,
also part of Link's history, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Right? He was a porter as well. He started out that way. And Ray Lewis talks about how he was a well-known sprinter, celebrated sprinter, and he went to M.M. Bobby Robinson, who at that time was the
sports editor of the Hamilton Spec.
Exactly. Trying to get a decent job. And Mr. Robinson said, "Sorry, I can't help you." And, he should have been somebody as a celebrated sprinter who could get a good job, but he couldn't, and so he decided he was not going to run in the first British Empire Games that were going to be held in Hamilton in, I think it was 1930.
Yes, it was.
So this just gives you an idea. If he couldn't get a job, what how would it be like for the average person to get a half-decent job in Hamilton, or in anywhere in Ontario, really.
I was actually really lucky late in Ray Lewis's life to meet and get to know him, because I'm a lifetime downtown Hamilton Y guy.
Right.
And he was often there and used to talk to me at the bus stop on James Street South outside of the Y
okay.
as we waited for the bus. And he would have been probably in his late 80s or 90s, and I was a kid, but he had a very gentle touch and was interested in everybody who kind of grew up at the downtown Y. So I feel fortunate to have made that connection in my life. So, Evelyn, I want you to talk a little bit about the map that you brought.
Yes.
And what it should tell us about the depth of Black history in Hamilton and the lives of the individuals that you've captured on the map.
Exactly. And that's the purpose for displaying this map today. And if you were to be able to look at each of these flags that are now all curled up on this map, you would see a diversity of human talent as well. You know, entrepreneurs and tradespeople who made up the Black community of Hamilton.
And date it for us, and just tell us what the map represents.
This map is dated as of the 1871 census of the Government of Canada that you know, counted the number of Black people that were living in the area, and noted it in the Hamilton, in the federal census. This map was produced by a student working a summer job at the Hamilton Public Library, who had this as their project to plot out this census on a map of Hamilton. And you can see a dense population in the sort of downtown area of Hamilton, but it stretches out into what beyond the Hamilton limits at that time, into Bartonville and, you know, Saltfleet and
Flamborough
and Flamborough.
Amherst.
So,
Yep.
so the Black community was dispersed throughout the Hamilton area. So you know, we have place all over this area, and should feel like we can go anywhere,
Right.
because we belong there.
Follow-up question on Stewart Memorial, because we talked a little bit about the leadership of some members of the congregation. We didn't really talk about the role of the church in faith leadership and that history in the community. Can you just touch on it briefly?
Well, I should have started everything in what I'm saying today with a praise to God, because it was deep faith that brought people to endure the rigors and the difficulties and the dangers of seeking freedom, to find themselves here in Hamilton and to set down a place that they could find sanctuary in, no matter where they were residing in Hamilton. Stewart Memorial Church, St. Paul's AME was the place. Right. The place that Black people, people of African descent, people of color, and any people, because certainly there were people from their neighborhood where the churches were, that had a belief that was like ours, a Christian belief, and they were our neighbors. So,
and that faith leadership continues.
It does. It does. In addition, it holds to the culture of worship that the Black people enjoy, which is music, musical harmony, spirituals, which came with the travelers. So it has it's a singing church. It has a rich musical history. So,
and my friend Michael Highgate continues to.
Very much. He's the leader of the choir. So he's helping to continue that legacy.
Don't tease him about his lousy golf game.
I won't.
I unfortunately, we're going to run out of time, but I said we were going to get to the hard question late. Yes. And I want you both to reflect on this. Through the course of both of your examinations and contributions to history, there have been barriers that have been overcome, and often we get complacent about history and the fact that, we've resigned to the dustbin of history, racism and xenophobia and all that kind of stuff, only to have it smack us again in the face. And I'm reminded, of course, of the words of Martin Luther King, who said, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice." But as we speak, we're seeing a return of many of the things that I think as supporters of diversity and inclusion we would have put behind us, and especially the rise of hate around the world and specifically in this community. So what are the lessons that we learn, and what should we be conscious of in Black History Month, and frankly in every month, in terms of making sure that we all give voice to the notion that there has to be a place and respect for every citizen of this community?
Well, I think we learned that we need information. We need to do some research and do some reading about the contributions of all people. Mm-hmm. And I saw an interview. It was an American program, and a white supremacist was being interviewed, and he was saying that African Americans had not been able to assimilate into American culture, and mm-hmm. I just thought that was so ridiculous. Mm-hmm. And we need information. I mean, even somebody like that, maybe at some point he can be persuaded by learning some facts. And so that's what I am hoping to do, and that's what Evelyn is hoping to do: educate people, mm-hmm. Bring out the information, talk about it, write about it, and in the hopes that this can help to dispel this kind of ignorance among people. Everybody's entitled to their own opinion, but not their own facts. Exactly. Same question to close. Well, the last 2 minutes go to you.
I would say that the lesson that mankind has not learned yet is that hatred kills. It kills the hater, mm-hmm. as well as inflicts damage out on the object of the hatred. And so to live within an environment that supports and encourages hatred is to say we no longer want to exist. It's about, no one asks a flower that is yellow why it's not blue. Mm-hmm. Why do we ask those questions of human beings? The diversity of the flower's color is there for our enjoyment. The diversity of the colors that we find in the human race is for our enjoyment, not for our ownership, mm-hmm. not for our control, not for our manipulation. And we have to come back to what is the outcome of hatred, and it is death. We all have to learn that truism.
Over and over again, it seems.
Yes, we have a difficult time with it.
We do. And on that thoughtful note, we are out of time. Adrienne Shadd, author of a great book, The Journey from Tollgate to Parkway. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your continued contributions to our understanding of Black history in Hamilton. And Evelyn Auchinvole, historian and resident Stewart Memorial Church leader, thank you for what you're doing and the difference that you have made. As always, it's been good to talk to you, and I hope we can continue this conversation in the not-too-distant future. I'm Terry Cooke. You've been watching Hamilton's Vital Signs. We're celebrating Black History Month in Hamilton, and as always, we would invite you to follow us on Facebook and Twitter and join us again next month. Thanks for being with us.